think of cricket. If India had as its goal that it wanted to be the most competitive nation in the world, and you can define this in a socialist manner. I'm a social democrat from Europe, right? I'm not actually a very right-wing person, but I do believe in being, if you want to try to do something, you got to try to be really good. If India tried not just to be sort of acceptable on regulations, sort of okay, compromise, but say, no, we're going to actually see whether we can beat China, not militarily, but by being the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. Could India do that? Sure. Nobody could believe that China could do it. When Korea became independent in 1960, it was poorer than the DRC, where I was country manager. Korea is now a completely industrialized country. Most of the products I have in my house are no longer from China, but from Korea, the advanced products. It is incredible what can happen if you just decide that you want to be really good. So my slogan for India is competitiveness as good as cricket, because clearly you're, at least right now, the best country in the world in cricket, and with a fairly young team. So I would want to give you that perspective, then you wouldn't have to worry about Kerala anymore. Yes?
I just had a thought on which, I'd appreciate your comments. Actually, India is so diverse. There are probably a lot of Indias living in this one country.
Absolutely.
So like you mentioned, Mexico and Argentina, they're more for enhancing their prosperity. So couldn't we look at India in two ways? A part of India which needs prosperity enhanced and the other part which needs poverty eradicated? Because you've just spoken about eradication of poverty from the really poor pockets. But there'd be parts which are already prosperous to a certain extent and need elevation on that.
Yes, you're very right. And I gave you the poverty story because of time limitations and also because it's analytically easier to tell the story. But for the advanced parts of India, the bottom 40% paradigm is as relevant as for Mexico as for Argentina. And it'll be even more interesting in India because if you really become serious about making the income of the bottom 40% something else than a statistic, but in other words, a goal, the issues of exclusion or inclusion that I talked about will have to be addressed because there's only one way you can deal with inequity in this situation. You cannot deal with it just with economics. You have to get into social issues and allow people much greater levels of empowerment and opportunity. So I totally agree with you. In terms of the World Bank's involvement, I think the arguments for us focusing on low-income states are still quite compelling given the limited resources. It's even more difficult to be relevant in the richer parts of India. And frankly, I can sort of half afford to talk to you about these social inclusion issues. I don't know, maybe some of you will think that I cannot afford to talk about it because I'm not from India. But I can tell you in Delhi, with the government there, I cannot afford to talk about it. Maybe women, but certainly not beyond that. Very, very sensitive issues. So if I would have to say where does the World Bank have more of a natural place, it would still be poverty. But the World Bank is only a small player, so it doesn't mean it's not important for India. Yes?
Hi. Something very specific and probably an agenda for you. You mentioned about the dedicated freight corridor and the funding. And of course, the logic you said, it's the core integration and the poor corridor. Yes, World Bank is a big financier, and therefore I think you have the leverage, and I'm not sure how deeply we have got into it. You see, the Eastern dedicated freight corridor is being made for single stacking of containers. The Western corridor is being made for double stacking.
Correct.
Indian Railways are setting new standards after 150 years of old standards of rail track. Now, I don't understand why the Eastern corridor is being made only for single stacking. I have written to the entire board of the dedicated freight corridor. They don't seem to take this into consideration because they say we are saving about 12 to 15% of the capital cost. But my view is that 10 years or 50 years, and if you start looking further, a lot of containers can actually start moving from Kolkata up or containers that are moving from Mumbai onto the eastern corridor cannot go double stacking. And to me, this is a big loss in the standard. So we are having two dedicated freight corridors with different standards. And I think if there is one organization that can do something about it, and it's still not too late, they have just begun construction.
Right.
I think it's the World Bank.
Well, thank you for raising that. I wasn't aware of the issue, but I can sort of imagine why it happened, because currently, of course, traffic on the western corridor will be much higher than on the eastern, so they went with a short-term vision, is what you said.
Absolutely. The driving cargo on the western corridor is containers. The driving cargo on the eastern corridor is coal.
I know.
But containers is the future.
Yes. So again, thank you for raising it. The guy in charge, I actually had him on the phone during lunch. I'll talk to him later today in Delhi to ask him.
Later on, I would be happy to engage more on this, but I think this is a very significant issue.
I'll hook you up with the team, which I think will be more productive. We don't always get it right, though. I do want to tell you that about 15 years ago, somebody asked the World Bank to get involved in financing the studies to think about building the Delhi metro. And we said we didn't think we wanted to do that because we didn't think Delhi could or should need a metro because it wasn't advanced enough and the traffic flows wouldn't be large enough. Well, that was obviously stupid advice. But thankfully, the Japanese did finance the building of the metro and it's now there. So sometimes you gave us a big compliment, but we don't always get it right, I have to say. But on this one, we might still get it right. So if you give me your card, I'll hook you up with the team. Yes.
Most powerful driver for poverty alleviation.
Yeah, except if you really get into the social inclusion, but it's more powerful but more difficult to reach. Yeah.
So basically, in case of urban cities in India, the urban institutions are not powerful enough, or maybe they are lacking capacity.
Correct.
And there's obviously a need for building capacity in the urban areas. So is World Bank strategy under this, is it to build the capacity or to finance projects? Which do you think is the more effective way to bridge this spatial?
In the urban space, first of all, India has a problem that is fairly typical for large federal countries, which is that the constitutional structure goes, in the case of India, from the union to states to districts to blocks, and cities are none of the above. And it means that the core administrative structure kind of ignores cities. In my previous country, Nigeria, was exactly like that. There was only one city that was a unit. That's because it was a state, being Lagos. In India, Delhi is a little bit like that. So that's one of the problems. Very difficult to solve or to influence for an external player because it's a constitutional issue. Second issue is that to create strong urban institutions is actually really, really difficult because urban spaces are very complex. So even in the best of circumstances, urban projects, even in the most advanced countries, are a challenge. Last thing in India is the fact that the politics in India is traditionally geared towards rural. Because the belief of the newspapers, I can't really say what politicians believe, but I can say what newspapers write, is that all the votes are in the rural areas and therefore the urban vote doesn't matter. I think that's actually a completely, deeply flawed reasoning, but that's just my personal opinion. I think it's another classic example of taking a static analysis and thinking it's dynamic, but that's okay. But in India, there's a fairly strong driver to think that politics is rural and therefore money flows into rural. And that's actually not a comment on this government. It's a historical shift. Part of it is also, of course, Gandhiji's image of village-based population, which has had a deep influence on thinking in India. So India has like a triple whammy of things that make urban a challenge. I think what we can say is, as an institution, World Bank, we have considerable knowledge about having done urban work in other large federal states, so we could possibly help on thinking through mechanisms and sharing experiences. We got considerably less experience in thinking through what this means in India, because we ourselves in India, we're also suffering from the rural bias. So what I've told the team is that the initial part of the urban shift is to do a lot of analytical work on urban, so that we understand better how we can use experiences from elsewhere in this very specific Indian context. Urban projects will also come, but it's not the first point of attack, to answer your specific question. Somebody, yes, yes.
You mentioned on sanitation, all states perform badly uniformly. So
Well, that was a bit of a simplification of the situation.
Is World Bank in any way engaging with states on sanitation specifically? And what are your thoughts on what India should do going forward? Because it doesn't seem to feature in one of the main priorities of most of the states. So,
yeah, we are engaging. It's a very big problem, and it's one of the things where you can actually, without hesitation, say that India does much worse than Africa, which is a very, I'm deliberately saying that because it's a shocking statement. Because I love Africa, I've worked there for 12 years, but India should not be doing worse on anything than Africa. It's hideous. So it is in fact hideous. The question is, what do you do about it? We have a program, even in our own house. The people who do drinking water and sanitation sometimes fight over which is more important. It drives me crazy, to be honest, because you can't actually have sanitation without water, and it makes no sense to put in water and then not to put in sanitation. But Sunita and Sudeep know that this is a big issue. It's one of those things. I made this side comment on 24/7, which in India means water, right? And the rest of the world it means 7-Eleven, which is not actually 24/7, but for those of you who know America. I think it would be really important for India to realize that this is actually, and it's not technically really India, it's all of South Asia, because it's actually not an Indian phenomenon, it's a South Asian phenomenon. I'm hoping someday somebody will say, maybe can't be best in the world, like I said on competitiveness, but can't possibly accept being last in the world, because that's the baseline situation. If you think through the consequences of the sanitation situation on development in India, the cost is absolutely stupendous. So that's all I can say. I'm not sure how effective an external partner can be. To me, it's more a question of the country deciding it wants to end the situation. It's absolutely nothing that would stop India from getting 100% sanitation. It's completely doable if somehow the decision maker, managerial energy, motivation could be mustered. Motivation typically not mustered by outsiders.
Last two questions.
Yes. Last question is going to a woman.
My question is also on spatial transformation.
Yes.
You spoke about letting people move from villages to towns. But at the same time, government is making all the moves to putting more restrictions on the amount of land that people can own.
Yeah.
That way, more and more people can own land and stay back in villages. So are you going to advise the government on going away from that policy, that kind of policy?
So first of all, my view is not that we should stop people from moving or encouraging them to move. My view is that we should understand that the fact that they move presents an opportunity on both ends of the spectrum, for agriculture and for the city. And that you need to take that move as a given and then leverage off it. Because you have a different situation in the countryside, and you have a different, and the cities need to be ready. In terms of land, throughout my career, I've just told you I've worked with the bank for 20 years in maybe 50 countries. There wasn't a single country that really was interested in a dialogue with us about land, because they consider land an issue of national sovereignty and great sensitivity. India has not been an exception, has been a marginal exception. We're helping states do self-assessments on land policies, which is a sort of politically convenient way, a socially convenient way of getting into the space without the World Bank expressing an opinion, which is really too sensitive. So I guess the short answer to your question is no. I said a woman.
I could be one.
Well, yes. Oh, you were just going like this, or you wanted to ask a question? Yes. The lady in black there. So, sorry, but I couldn't make my big pitch about the 50 million women.
After the last, if you're okay.
I'm perfectly fine.
So I'm just curious to know, what does World Bank actually do to make cities like Kanpur and the rest more welcoming to people who come from the rural areas?
So, sorry. There's a couple of things we're looking at, because this is a new area. So our urban engagement is essentially along the dedicated freight corridor, so in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, and then it's in Bombay, where we have a very long-standing historical relationship. Bombay is easier to describe. There, you know that the actual city of Mumbai is full. Has about 15 million people. You can't really fit anybody else in there. So Mumbai is sort of expanding. This is the city of Mumbai across the bay. You've got Navi Mumbai here, and this is a place they call the multimodal corridor. It's a place that connects different towns and will be the place where about half of the greater Mumbai residents will live in 2030. So what we're actually doing there is working on almost like the China model, putting in the infrastructure while the urbanization is happening, not quite before it's happening, but basically it's already clear where people are going to move. So it's a lot easier to put in the roads and the sewers and the power lines before they move than after they've created their slum. So we're trying to do that, and it could be transformational. We're working with MMRDA on that, the Metro Mumbai Regional Development Authority. In the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor space, what we've done is actually done spatial analysis of where agglomeration is likely to happen and picked a few focus districts to try and think of doing the same, but we're less advanced because there's no MMRDA there. MMRDA is a really advanced, enlightened institution. Somewhat controversial also, but we think of it as good. But the logic is that. Then also where you have existing cities to do things like in situ upgrading, so not moving people but make their environment better. It's already much less efficient but needs to happen, talking about slums here. And then a lot around the urban transport space, because one of the big problems with urban spaces is that if people have individual transportation, then it's by definition impossible to get efficient infrastructure, so urban transport would be a big issue. But like I said earlier, we're still very much learning in the urban space. What we really would want to get into is issues of how to strengthen urban institutions, because of the weakness of urban institutions in many urban spaces in India.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us for this wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for coming and giving us an enlightened speech. A small token of thanks from our side.
Oh no, this is actually
Oh, lovely.
our sign, and it says Vidya Vidinyo.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.